Okay, so you want to own a ranch. Not a hobby farm with 3 goats and a chicken coop, a real one. Your name burned into a steel gate at the end of a road that isn't on most maps. A herd wearing your brand. A truck that smells like hay and diesel, and a horizon that runs out of daylight before it runs out of your property line. You picture writing rancher on a form one day and actually meaning it. Here's what nobody prints in the brochure. The brochure never shows the vet bill that lands the same morning a calf is born dead in the mud. It doesn't show the water well that quits in the middle of July with 200 thirsty animals standing downhill of it. And it definitely doesn't show the 3 years in a row where you did everything right, worked every single day, and still moved exactly $0 into your own bank account. Because every dollar the ranch made, the ranch immediately ate. Ranching might be the only business in America where the harder you work, the more clearly you can see that your effort was never the variable that mattered. Because here's the actual shape of the thing. Your money arrives once a year, maybe twice. Your bills arrive every day without exception. And the single input that decides whether you win or lose, the weather, doesn't take your calls, doesn't read your budget, and doesn't care that you mortgaged your entire life to stand on this dirt. Some ranches make money. Plenty of them lose it quietly for years while looking richer on paper the whole time. And a few of them take people who had everything and hand them back nothing but a very expensive lesson. By the end of this, you'll know exactly which of those 3 you're standing in line to buy. And you'll understand why the smartest money in the country keeps buying anyway. But before we talk about money, we have to talk about what a ranch even is. Because ranch is one of those words that quietly means about a dozen completely different businesses that happen to share some fencing. A cattle ranch raises beef. A sheep ranch raises wool and meat. A horse operation breeds and trains. A hunting ranch sells wildlife instead of livestock. A guest ranch sells the feeling of cowboy life for a long weekend. It's a boutique hotel that happens to own horses. And then there's the luxury recreational ranch, which is a category all its own, where the land might raise almost nothing at all. Its real product is a private address and a tax position. These are not the same business. They share a zip code and a look, and almost nothing else on the balance sheet. A hill country guest ranch and a 500-cow operation on the northern plains might both call themselves ranches, but one is hospitality with a view and the other is a commodity protein factory fighting the global beef market every single morning. Which one you're buying decides everything about the math that follows. We're going to walk through the hard one, the working cattle ranch, the version most people picture, the version with the most moving parts and the most ways to lose. Start with the biggest number, because it decides every number after it. It isn't the cattle. It isn't the tractors. It's the dirt. Land is the entire cost of ranching, and it's also the entire trick of it, because there are 2 completely different prices living inside the same fence line. And almost nobody buying their first ranch understands that until it's too late. The national average for pasture land in America sits somewhere around $1,900 an acre. That sounds almost reasonable. It's also almost meaningless, because that average is hiding a spread so wide it's practically useless. In parts of Wyoming, ranch land runs closer to $1,000 an acre. In far west Texas, you can find dirt for $600. Those are the bargains. Now drive to the hill country outside Austin. That same acre runs $7,000, $15,000, $30,000. Along Colorado's Front Range near the resort towns, land pushes past $50,000 an acre. And in those places, something strange has happened. The value of the grass and the value of the ground have completely divorced each other. You're not paying for what the land can grow. You're paying for the view and for the wealthy neighbors and for the right to say you own it. So here's the first trap, and new buyers walk straight into it every time. They look at Wyoming at $1,000 an acre next to Texas hill country at $15,000, and they think, obviously, buy the cheap one. But cheap land is never actually cheap. It's cheap for a reason, and the reason costs you money forever. Cheap land means sparse grass, which means each cow needs far more of it, 20, 30 acres a head instead of 2 or 3. It means winters that force you to buy hay for 5 or 6 months because nothing is growing. It means your nearest feed supplier is 90 minutes away, and the auction barn is farther than that. The price on the sign and the price to operate move in opposite directions. Read that again because it's the entire game. The land that costs less to buy costs more to run every day for as long as you own it. Say you want a serious operation anyway. In the cattle world, serious starts somewhere around 200 to 500 cows. To run 500 cows on arid western ground, where a single animal might need 25 acres of thin grass, you're looking at 10 to 15,000 acres. At $1,000 an acre, that's $10 to $15 million. Before a single cow, before a single fence post. And now the part that ambushes almost everyone, because it never appears on the listing. You don't buy a ranch, you buy the right to start spending money on a ranch. Before the land earns a nickel, you have to make it operational, and none of that infrastructure is optional. Fencing runs $8,000 to $13,000 a mile, and a 15,000-acre property has a perimeter you measure in dozens of miles, plus interior fences to rotate the grazing. That's a few $100,000 in barbed wire and steel posts alone. Then water, because in most of the West, surface water is scarce and regulated. A deep agricultural well runs anywhere from $8,000 to $25,000 to drill and pump, and one well only serves so many acres, so you need several, plus miles of buried pipe and the power to push it uphill. Then working corrals, because you cannot vaccinate or load a 1,200-pound animal that doesn't want to be handled without heavy steel to do it in. Then hay storage, because wet hay grows mold and moldy hay is worthless. Then roads that don't turn to soup in March. Then somewhere for your people to live because nobody is driving 2 hours each way to fix your fence. Add it up. On raw ground, a new owner can bury $500,000 to over $1 million into the property before a single cow eats a single blade of grass. That's money that goes into the dirt and produces nothing. It's just the cost of being allowed to begin. Now you buy the cattle. And here's the thing about this particular asset. It breathes. A bred cow, one that's already carrying a calf, costs somewhere between $200 and $3,500 in a normal market, and the market lately has been anything but normal. Assembling 500 of them runs well over $1 million. Then you need bulls, roughly one for every 25 or 30 cows. A basic bull is a few $1,000s. A bull with documented genetics, the kind whose calves gain weight faster and grade higher at the packing plant, can run $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 at auction. And genetics matter more than outsiders think, because the difference between a top-grading calf and an average one, multiplied across hundreds of head a year, is a real slice of your income. But here's what you're really signing up for. Your inventory has a pulse, and anything with a pulse can flatline. The $35,000 bull you just bought can break a leg in a creek crossing and be gone before Monday. He doesn't come with a warranty. Your entire warehouse of assets can get sick, escape, freeze in a blizzard, or simply lie down and die, and none of it is covered by anyone. And you can't move, feed, or handle any of it without machinery. The fleet that never stops breaking. This is the bill that ambushes people who did the cattle math and forgot the iron. You need tractors, and you need at least two, because when one dies during calving season or in the middle of the winter feeding grind, you cannot wait 3 weeks for a part to ship. A utility tractor that can run a hay feeder and a front loader is $60,000 to $120,000 new. You need a baler if you're making your own hay. Call it another $25,000 to $40,000. You need heavy pickups that can pull a loaded livestock trailer, $55,000 to $85,000 each, and the gooseneck trailer itself, $20,000 to $45,000. Add a side-by-side for checking fence across country a truck can't reach, a fuel tank so you're not driving to town for diesel every other day, and a list of smaller equipment that never stops growing. Here's the mistake almost every new owner makes. They buy all of it new, on payment plans. Finance $200,000 of equipment at today's rates, and you're looking at $3,000 or $4,000 a month in debt service. That's $36,000 to $48,000 a year going out the door before you've sold a single animal. On a smaller operation, that number alone is the difference between breaking even and bleeding. The ranchers who survive buy used, and they buy machinery sized to the herd they actually have, not the herd they daydream about. So now you own the land, the fences, the water, the iron, and the herd. Time to get paid. Here's how a cattle ranch actually makes money. A cow carries a calf for 9 months, nurses it for 6 or 7, and then you wean that calf and sell it by the pound. A weaned calf weighs maybe 500 or 600 pounds. In the strong market of the last couple of years, a good steer calf might bring $2,200 to $2,600 a head. So let's run it. 500 cows, a strong 90% calving rate, gives you around 450 calves. Blend the steers and the lighter heifers, call it roughly $2,200 a head average, and you've got about $1 million in gross revenue. Sounds great. Now subtract. Because the bills don't wait for the fall sale, they arrive every single day. Feed is the monster. From November to April, in a cold state, you're buying or hauling hay every morning, and a single cow can go through a round bale every 3 or 4 days. Across 500 head and 150 days of winter, that's easily $150,000 in hay in a normal year. Then the vet. Healthy cattle still get sick, calves still arrive in February blizzards, and basic herd health, vaccinations, pregnancy checks, deworming, the occasional emergency, runs $35 to $60 a head a year. On 500 cows, that's another $20,000 to $30,000 in a good year. Then labor, and this is the one people underestimate the most. You cannot run a real operation alone. You need a manager, a hand or two who can actually ride and work cattle, and someone who can keep the equipment alive. And experienced, reliable ranch help has become one of the hardest things to find in all of agriculture. The work is brutal, the locations are remote, and younger workers keep choosing anything else. A lot of ranches now bring in seasonal labor through the federal H-2A visa program, which means paperwork, and which means building housing for those workers on the property too. Add property taxes, liability insurance, electricity for the well pumps, fuel for the whole fleet, and the repairs that never stop. This isn't a part-time expense. It's a payroll and a utility bill and a maintenance schedule, 7 days a week, every week of the year. Stack it all up against that million in revenue, and your operating and fixed costs land somewhere between $900,000 and $1.1 million on a well-run operation this size. Do the arithmetic. In a good year, in a strong market, you might net somewhere between $0 and $100,000 on an investment of $7 to $12 million. That's a return of maybe 1%. A savings account pays more. And that is the dirty secret at the center of the whole romantic industry. The cash you make from actually selling cattle is, in most years, painfully thin, and in plenty of years, it's negative. Now here's where it turns dangerous. Every number I just gave you assumed 3 things: rain, a 90% calf crop, and a market that held. None of the 3 are promised to anyone. Start with rain, because it's the one that ends people. The national cattle herd has been sitting at its smallest level in something like 70 years, and it got there for one reason: drought. When the grass stops growing in June instead of September, you start buying hay 2 months early, and so does everyone else, which means the price of that hay doubles or triples right when you need it most. So you face an ugly choice: pay the spike and watch your costs explode, or sell cattle to shrink the herd. And here's the vicious part. If you sell, you're selling your income-producing assets. Fewer cows means fewer calves next year. And when the rain finally returns and you go to rebuild, everyone else is rebuilding too. So replacement cattle are expensive exactly when you can least afford them. What the good year gives you, the drought takes back over the following 3. Then there's the market itself, which swings on cycles you don't control. A feeder cattle index can move $55 per hundredweight in 6 months. On a 500-pound calf, across 450 of them, that's over $100,000 of revenue that can appear or vanish on nothing but timing. You didn't do anything differently. You raised the same calves, the number just moved. That's the volatility trap. Your costs are close to fixed, your revenue is anything but, and the gap between the two is where ranchers go broke. And it doesn't only break the newcomers. The droughts that rolled across Texas and the southern plains in the last decade didn't take out first-time buyers with more money than sense. They took out families who had ranched the same ground for 50, 75 years, people who knew every water hole and every low spot where the grass came in thick. The drought didn't care. Pastures that had fed cattle for generations turned to cracked clay. Stock ponds dried to dust. And the ones who held on the longest, praying for rain, often sold at the very bottom anyway, after burning through their reserves buying hay at prices they'd never imagined. Experience doesn't beat weather. Nothing beats weather. It only decides how long you last. So how does anyone actually make money out here? The ones who do almost never make it on cattle alone. They looked at their land and asked a different question. What else does this dirt produce that somebody will pay for? Call it the second checkbook. Hunting leases are the most overlooked line on the whole operation. In strong deer or game country, a rancher can lease hunting rights for $5 to $25 an acre a year. On a 15,000-acre place, that's $75,000 to $375,000 a year. And the cattle are still standing there. The grass is still growing, and you haven't sold a thing. Hay is another one. In a wet year, you cut and bale your surplus, and in a drought year, that hay can be worth more than the cattle it was meant to feed. And then there's agritourism. People will pay $300 to $800 a night to ride a horse, work a few cattle, and sleep somewhere quiet with a sky full of stars. None of these turns a struggling ranch into a fortune on its own. But stack 2 or 3 of them, and you get the one thing commodity cattle can never give you. Cash flow that doesn't all arrive on the same autumn afternoon, and a real cushion for the bad years the cattle business absolutely guarantees. So here's the question that should be bothering you by now. If the cattle barely break even, why do some of the wealthiest people alive keep buying ranches at prices no cattle operation could ever justify? Ted Turner owns something like 2 million acres, more than anyone else in the country. John Malone owns roughly the same. Bill Gates has quietly become one of the largest private farmland holders in America. These people are not betting they'll get rich selling calves. They're buying something the calf math never captures. Privacy, for one. A 100,000-acre ranch is an address that essentially doesn't exist, with a perimeter that keeps the world out, for appreciation, for another. Land is finite. It doesn't have a bad quarter. It doesn't miss an earnings call, and it doesn't go to zero. In much of the West, ranch ground has climbed steadily for decades. And then the quiet one, taxes. Run a token herd of cattle, and the land often qualifies for an agricultural exemption that slashes the property tax bill from crushing to trivial. Donate a conservation easement, and you can shelter tens of millions in income while never giving up an acre you use. For them, the cattle aren't the business. The cattle are the paperwork that protects the real asset underneath. The herd exists to keep the tax status alive. That's the whole trick, sitting in plain sight. Let's build a real one then, so you can see how the two halves fit together. Say you buy 6,000 acres of northern plains grass at $1,500 an acre, $9 million in land. Put a third down, finance the rest at today's rates, and you're carrying somewhere around $400,000 a year in debt service on the ground alone. The property needs fencing work and new water, so there's another $300,000 up front before you begin. You stock it with 300 cows and the bulls to cover them. Call it $600,000. And you buy your equipment used to keep the payments down, another $250,000. Now run the year. 300 cows at roughly $1,000 a head in operating cost is $300,000. A 90% calf crop gives you about 270 calves, and at $2,200 a head, that's a shade under $600,000 in gross revenue. Net it out and the cattle throw off maybe $250,000 before land costs, a genuinely good result for an operation this size. And then the land bill takes almost all of it. $400,000 in debt service against $250,000 in cattle income means the cows are covering roughly 60 cents of every dollar you owe on the dirt, and you're feeding the rest out of pocket. This is why the industry talks about returns of 1 to 3% in a good year. The land is simply too expensive relative to anything the grass can grow, but watch what the same land does quietly in the background. If that 9 million appreciates even 4% a year, roughly the long-run pace, that's $360,000 added to your net worth, almost exactly what the debt service costs you. The cattle pay to keep the lights on. The land is the thing getting rich. You're just the one standing between them, absorbing the difference. Which brings us to the honest math. 2 years, same ranch, same effort. The good year, wet spring, cheap hay, a market that holds. Your calves sell strong, your costs stay reined in, you clear a solid profit from the cattle. And on top of that, your land quietly appreciates a few percent. Call it a few $100,000 added to your net worth on paper, without you touching a thing. The bad year. A late blizzard kills 60 calves over one 2-day storm in March. Summer drought forces you into the hay market months early at prices 30% over budget. The fall market softens, buyers get cautious, and your steers bring less than you planned. Your revenue collapses, your feed bill balloons, and you post a loss of several $100,000. And this year, the land value is flat. No cushion, nothing. The gap between those 2 years, on the exact same ranch, run by the exact same person, is over $500,000. And almost all of it comes down to weather and market timing, 2 things you will never ever control. So here's the truth the porch photos never tell you. You never really owned the grass. You rented it from the sky, 1 season at a time, and the sky sets the rent whenever it feels like it. The land gets rich slowly, quietly, whether you're there working or not. The cattle just cover the cost of being allowed to stand on that land and wait. The people who survive this business aren't the toughest, and they aren't the smartest. Everyone out here works hard, and hard work was never the variable. The ones who make it are the ones with enough cash in reserve and enough patience to still be standing when the rain finally comes back. So can a ranch make you rich? Yes, it genuinely can. Just almost never through the cattle, and almost never on the timeline you had in your head when you first pictured yourself on that porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over land with your name on the gate. The romance is real. The arithmetic is brutal. And the people who thrive out here are the ones who can hold both of those in the same hand, and never once confuse the sunrise for the thing that's actually paying the bills.